Welcome to Byte-Sized Tech, where we like to take casual conversations and mix them up with some insightful looks at what's happening in the tech world and, all those fun gadgets we love.
Absolutely.
Today, we're going to dive deep into something making some serious waves. Some ripples and waves, you could say. That's right, tariffs.
Tariffs, yeah, tariffs.
Exactly. And specifically, how these new tariffs are everything. There's like your phone, your laptop, the companies making them the whole shebang.
Yeah, we've got a whole stack of reports analyses here.
Yeah.
And it really does touch on so many things.
It does.
From, the cost of making these gadgets to supply chains getting all messed up.
Yeah.
Even like international relations and how companies are investing.
It's huge, and that's exactly what we want to unpack today.
Unpack it.
So to kick things off, let's zoom out and look at the market reaction in general, because it looks like things got pretty rocky recently, right?
Oh, yeah.
We saw big tech stocks sell off, hitting the NASDAQ 100 their worst day since 2022. And it wasn't just, those smaller companies. We're talking those big names, the Magnificent Seven.
Right. Apple, Amazon, Google,
yeah,
the whole crew.
Exactly. Meta, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Tesla. They all took a hit.
Yeah. And it's interesting. There's some debate on what really set this off.
Yeah, okay.
The Treasury Secretary actually suggested maybe it's more of a Mag 7 problem.
A Mag 7 problem, okay.
Linked to the peak of all the excitement around that big AI model launch. DeepSeek.
DeepSeek, okay.
Maybe the market was just kind of, correcting itself after all that AI hype.
Little DeepSeek hangover, you could say.
Yeah, exactly. But the main idea from analysts, and this is what's really important for you, is that these tariffs are a major player in this downturn.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Because think about it, tariffs equal higher costs for companies right off the bat, and then they've got a choice to make. Do they raise prices for you, the consumer, and maybe see demand drop? Or do they eat those costs and see their profits shrink, which makes investors nervous?
Yeah, nobody wants that. So let's focus in on one company that seems to be right in the eye of the storm.
Yeah.
Apple. They're seeing their biggest market cap drop ever, possibly a $300 billion loss in just one day.
Wow.
That's a number that's almost hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
Why is Apple specifically so vulnerable to these tariffs?
Well, it really shows how complex these global supply chains are.
Mm.
Apple's been working to move some production away from China.
Right, diversify a bit.
Yeah, exactly. But they still have a lot of manufacturing happening in other Asian countries like Vietnam, even in Europe, with Ireland.
Okay.
And guess what all those places are now under these new tariffs?
Mm-hmm.
So even their efforts to diversify haven't completely shielded them from this, this hit.
It's a tough spot to be in, and some analysts aren't holding back on their opinions.
Right.
Rosenblatt Securities apparently said these tariffs blow up Apple's business model.
Wow.
And even question why an American icon like Apple would be targeted.
Yeah, strong words.
Yeah, really strong, and I think it reflects a real worry about how this could hurt Apple's profits in the long term.
Yeah, and while future exemptions are always a possibility, history shows that Apple hasn't always had the best luck when trying to get special treatment on trade issues.
Right.
So, yeah, a lot of uncertainty for Apple and ultimately for you as someone who buys their products or maybe even invests in them.
Yeah, for sure. So it's not just Apple feeling the squeeze, right?
No, definitely not.
What about the other big tech players? How are companies like Amazon and Meta dealing with all this?
Okay, so for Amazon, what's crucial for you to consider is just their sheer size.
Massive.
Huge. They import a ton of stuff manufactured in Asia.
Right.
So these tariffs put them in a similar bind.
Yeah.
Do they absorb those higher costs or pass them along to you with higher prices?
Yeah, that seems to be the big question for a lot of companies.
It is. Now, Meta's situation is a bit different, but still a big deal.
Okay, how so?
It all comes down to the removal of this thing called the de minimis exemption.
The de minimis, what now?
Okay, think of it like a small value import loophole.
Okay.
It basically meant that shipments below a certain value, often stuff you buy online from overseas,
Right.
they could come into the U.S. without tariffs, but now they're gone. And that directly impacts a lot of those smaller exporters and retailers who advertise heavily on Meta's platforms.
I see.
So as their costs go up, it could affect how much they spend on advertising.
Okay.
So even though Meta isn't directly importing tons of goods, they're feeling the effects through the businesses that use their services.
Interesting. So even companies not making physical products are feeling the ripple effects?
Yeah, exactly.
What about Google and Microsoft? What are they up to in all of this?
Well, Google's name popped up in discussions about potential retaliatory digital services taxes from the EU.
Okay. We'll definitely circle back to that.
Yes, we will now. Microsoft is reportedly scaling back on some of their global data center projects.
Interesting.
Now, our sources don't directly tie that to the tariffs, but it does make you wonder if there's a bigger economic nervousness at play,
Yeah, for sure.
and maybe even concerns about whether this rapid growth in AI infrastructure is sustainable.
An AI infrastructure slowdown, that's not something you hear every day.
No, it's not.
What about those semiconductor giants like NVIDIA? They've been doing pretty well with this whole AI boom.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And even with current exemptions on semiconductors, there's this looming threat of further tariffs and retaliatory measures.
Right.
It's definitely casting a shadow over the whole sector.
Yeah.
And you got to think about Taiwan. They're essential for global semiconductor manufacturing, and they're facing a big tariff right now. So for you down the line, this probably means U.S. semiconductor companies will have to pay more.
Okay.
And eventually, those costs could trickle down to the price of electronics.
Makes sense. It seems like there's this web of interconnected consequences.
Exactly.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about Europe, because it sounds like they're not too happy about these U.S. tariffs and might be considering some countermeasures.
Yeah, that's right. France and Germany are leading the charge for a strong EU response. And one of their key proposals is digital servile taxes, specifically targeting U.S. tech companies.
Interesting.
And it's important for you to understand that this isn't just about tech for Europe.
Okay.
France has even encouraged all EU companies to think about putting their U.S. investments on hold. It shows a much bigger concern about the whole trade situation.
Wow. That's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah.
But realistically, how likely is it that the entire EU will actually agree on something like digital services taxes? I mean, they haven't had the easiest time with that in the past.
You're right. It's been tough historically to get all the EU member states on the same page when it comes to taxes.
Yeah, different priorities and all that.
Exactly. France and Germany might be aligned. But getting everyone in the EU to unanimously agree, that's a hurdle and a half.
It is so, looking at the big picture, what could be the long-term fallout from all this trade tension? Could we see like a real split in the global tech world?
It's a real possibility that people are talking about.
Wow.
We could see a bifurcation of tech markets with different rules and taxes in the U.S. and Europe.
Yeah.
And we might even see Europe try harder to develop their own alternatives to those dominant U.S. tech platforms, although that hasn't really worked out in the past because of market size and, just how fragmented things are.
Right, so it feels like we're in uncharted territory for global tech with all this volatility. Is there any good news out there for investors? Could this be a chance to snag some good stocks at a discount?
Well, some analysts are saying that this sell-off could create some buying opportunities.
Okay.
They're calling them dislocated high-quality companies, or DHQs for short.
DHQs, I like it.
Yeah, catchier, right? So these are companies that are trading at lower values now because of the short-term chaos, but the idea is their fundamental strength will win out in the end.
Okay.
But here's the catch for you. As an investor, you got to be picky. It's not just a buy everything while it's down situation.
Gotcha. A more strategic approach is needed.
Exactly.
So what are people expecting from tech companies when they release their next earnings reports?
The general feeling is that the numbers for the last quarter might still look pretty good, but most tech companies will probably be more cautious about their predictions for the current quarter
That makes sense.
because of all the uncertainty these tariffs have created. So we might see forecasts that are in line with or even a bit lower than what Wall Street is guessing right now. One little bit of good news, though, currency fluctuations don't seem to be as big a problem as people thought they'd be.
Okay, well, hey, small victories, right?
Right.
What about the economy overall? Are these tariffs expected to put a damper on things like business spending on IT?
There's definitely a worry that all this uncertainty could lead to businesses being more hesitant to invest in new tech.
Yeah, it makes sense. When the future looks shaky, people tend to hold back.
Exactly.
But it sounds like there's one area of tech investment that's going to keep chugging along no matter what: AI.
Yeah. Artificial intelligence, that's the one.
It is. So despite all this tariff drama, major players like Amazon and Google are still expected to keep pouring money into AI.
Yeah, the potential for big efficiency gains is just too tempting to ignore.
Right, like AI writing code or, automating those huge warehouses.
Exactly. But the big question mark for you is, will the tariffs and the whole shaky economic situation actually affect how much people are buying stuff?
Yeah.
And therefore, the profits that these AI investments are hoping for?
So AI is still a star of the show, but its success might depend on how this whole trade situation plays out.
That's it in a nutshell.
Now, I want to talk about a company that shows even US-based manufacturers aren't immune to these tariff troubles.
Okay.
We heard about this company called Ample. They're making EV battery swapping modules here in the US,
Right.
but they're still getting hit with tariffs
Yeah.
because they need to import certain components that just aren't available domestically yet.
It's a good example of the complexities of these tariffs.
It is.
The CEO pointed out 3 key things to think about.
Okay.
Where's the production happening, where the material's coming from, and what happens to the finished products, especially when you're exporting them.
Right. And it sounds like exporting from the US just got a whole lot harder.
There's this trade mechanism called duty drawback. Basically, if a U.S. manufacturer imported parts and paid tariffs on them, they could get those tariffs back if they used those parts to build something that was then exported.
Okay.
It helped make U.S.-made stuff more competitive globally, but now they're getting rid of this duty drawback in a lot of cases,
Wow.
which makes it more expensive for U.S. companies to sell their products overseas.
That doesn't really seem to help if the goal is to boost American manufacturing and exports.
Doesn't it? And Ample's CEO was very clear about the challenges these tariffs create for all businesses, especially smaller ones.
Yeah.
Because there are so many tariffs being put in place so fast and they keep changing, it's almost impossible to plan your supply chain in the long term.
Right. It's like trying to hit a moving target.
Exactly.
But Ample still wants to produce in the US in the long run.
They do.
They just need more help from the government and more time to build up their domestic sourcing.
Yeah, they need a little breathing room.
It really highlights how these tariffs can have unintended consequences, even hurting companies trying to do business right here at home.
For sure.
Now let's switch gears and look at this from the consumer's perspective. How are these tariffs going to affect our wallets directly?
Well, you're likely going to see price increases on a lot of different things.
Okay.
A good example is getting rid of that de minimis exemption for Chinese e-commerce.
Yeah.
Remember that loophole we talked about?
Yeah.
Well, now it's gone, which means a lot of those cheap things you buy online from Chinese retailers are going to have tariffs slapped on them.
Oh, no.
So you'll probably see those prices go up when they arrive at your doorstep.
So much for those online bargains.
Yeah, it's a bummer. Now, on a slightly different note, we've seen Verizon trying to navigate all of this with a new customer-focused approach.
Right, their 3-year price lock and those better phone trade-in deals.
Yep, they're trying to attract and keep customers in this super competitive market where prices keep going up.
It's a smart move.
It is, they're offering you price certainty and flexibility during these uncertain times. Yeah, exactly.
And they seem pretty confident because they're mainly focused on the U.S. market. And they have these strong partnerships that they think will help them handle the cost pressures.
Interesting.
They're also expecting more people to upgrade their phones next year.
Okay.
And they're continuing to invest heavily in things like fiber and AI. They see AI as crucial for making their operations better. Things like analyzing customer sentiment in real time.
It's interesting to see how different parts of the economy are responding to these bigger forces.
It is.
Finally, let's talk about the broader economic and geopolitical implications of all this, because it feels like these tariffs are about a lot more than just trade numbers.
Absolutely. There's a lot of worry about other countries retaliating.
Right. We already saw Canada responding to those U.S. auto tariffs by saying they'll match those tariffs on passenger vehicles.
Yeah, and remember, French President Macron suggesting that French companies should stop investing in the U.S. as a direct response.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty strong reactions. It signals a real breakdown in traditional trade relationships. It does. These widespread tariffs are pretty unprecedented in recent history.
Yeah, creating a lot of uncertainty for global trade.
Right?
And multinational companies are having to rethink their global investment strategies, including that popular China Plus One approach to diversifying their supply chains.
So much upheaval.
There's also concern about less international investment in the U.S. as investors get nervous about the risks.
It's a domino effect.
It is. And the impact is spreading to other Asian economies besides China. Places like Vietnam, Cambodia, Bangladesh.
Yeah.
It's disrupting their growing role in the global supply chain.
It's a lot to take in, and the big question for all of us now is, will governments keep escalating these tariffs, or will they eventually try to negotiate and reduce these trade barriers?
That's the million-dollar question.
It really is. It feels like we're just starting to see the potential long-term consequences of all of this.
Yeah, agreed. These tariffs are actively reshaping the global economic landscape.
It's a lot, and we've covered a lot today. Thanks for diving deep with us.
My pleasure.
As these tariffs continue to reshape the global tech landscape, I want you to think about this. What do you think will be the biggest long-term impact on innovation and the tech you use every day? It's a complex issue, and we've only just scratched the surface here.
Definitely lots to ponder.
Thanks for tuning in to Bite-Sized Tech. If you enjoyed the episode, like, comment, share, and subscribe for more fun tech discussions.
See you next time.